Hello, it's Kenny again. Welcome to the second movement of Muzio Clementi Sonatina in C major. This is the slow movement. Normally in a classical sonata, the second movement is slow, and it's kind of a different form-wise than the first, and the third for that matter. But first of all, before I teach this piece, which is not all that difficult compared to the first and third movements, I'm going to discuss a little bit about Clementi and the classical period. Now again, Muzio Clementi, he was Italian, 1752 to 1832, which is almost exactly where the classical period is known to exist, all right? Born in Rome, but by the time he was 14, he was already an established composer. He had written masses, he wrote these things called oratorios, and he was the church organist at 14 years old in a major Roman church. But this guy named Sir Peter Beckford came and heard this guy and decided he would be his patron. Beckford was from England, so he takes young 14-year-old Muzio Clementi all the way to England just to be a musician and get more training, which is why Clementi's music is not particularly Italian. He had a much more English upbringing. He did many, many tours of all of Europe, mostly in Germany and stuff, where he met many composers. I'm going to describe this in a little bit here. But he was not just known as a composer. He was a very good keyboardist, mostly on the harpsichord at first and then into the piano and stuff. But he was a publisher, and he also built pianos. He could sell pianos, and he designed some pianos. Very smart guy. Okay? And in the next lesson, I'm going to tell you a little story about him, which is really quite funny. But for the meantime, just letting you know that he's, yes, a Roman composer, but he's mostly got more of a more mainland kind of training, because he did most of his training and lived most of his life in England. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the classical period. Now, the classical period is generally given to be from 1750 to 1820. As I said, almost the exact years that Clementi was alive. All right? And this followed the Baroque period, which is when Bach and Handel were writing. And it is characterized by many, many things, but also bigger orchestras, larger symphonies, bigger stuff altogether, all right? And there are all kinds of religious music still being written, but it wasn't the focus, whereas it was with Bach and Handel, all right? And they had different instruments, more evolved instruments, particularly with the keyboards. Bach and stuff would have written for the harpsichord, and Clementi and all these guys started on harpsichord, but by the time the classical period was well underway, the piano came into play. And what the big difference is, the harpsichord is a plucked instrument, right? It had kind of little quills or something, more like a harp, whereas the piano has hammered instruments. It's considered percussion, actually, but you have the hammers hitting strings, which are very different sound, all right? So these instruments made a big impact on how the composers changed writing music, all right? And the other thing in the classical period is a trend away from counterpoint. Counterpoint being, particularly with Bach, the master of counterpoint, where you had multiple lines weaving in amongst each other. But with the classical period, you started having much more that we're familiar with right now, a melody and a harmony. Usually the melody in your right hand and then the chords in the left hand. Not single lines, but chords and melody. And this is the classical period when this really came into play. Now there's Mr. Clementi over there, all right, but the other common composers here, these are huge names in classical music, all right? This guy, Mr. Joseph Haydn, taught a couple of his pieces, and he invented the string quartet. He wrote 104 symphonies. All of these composers I mentioned wrote lots of piano sonatas and stuff. All right, he lived for a long, long time, but he is considered the father of classical music. He was around, outlived Mozart and everyone, all right, because he was around. He was almost 100 years old, and that's a long time at that time. But speaking of Mitch, here's Mr. Mozart. He didn't live all that long, unfortunately, only 35 years. But he also wrote symphonies, but he was also very famous for his operas. Just revolutionized the world of opera. And then, of course, the big monster here, Mr. Beethoven. He took everything just another step further. The string quartets were really developed, and his symphonies were huge compared to what Mozart and Haydn had written. He just basically just took everything and exploded it out. And there's another guy that's really quite known in the classical period. Another one that died very young at 31. This is a guy named Franz Schubert, and I will be teaching some of his. But he also wrote symphonies, sonatas, but he's famous for his songs. Just beautiful songs, just little short things, what we know as a song. Someone singing, usually to accompanied with a piano or something. But anyway, that's just a little bit of an idea of who was writing in the classical period and what it's about. Now, the second movement of the sonatina that I'm going to teach is the slow one, as I said. Just to remind you what it sounds like, I will play it again and then get on to the lesson. Now, the second movement of a sonata or a sonatina is usually a slow movement, all right? It just wants to be a little break between usually the faster first and third movements. Give it a break and some nice melody or something, all right? And the form of this is not too complicated either. Usually the second movement is not in the complicated sonata form, and I like to think of this one as an ABA form. And it'll make sense as I get going here. We're going to do section A first, but all it is you do a section, and then a slightly different one, then you come back, and it's no different than pop music when you have a verse, a chorus, coming back to the verse, sometimes going back to the chorus, going back to the verse. No different than that. No more complicated than that. Okay? So anyway, we'll look at section A right now, and it's just a simple melody. Very simple melody, all right? But what is interesting here is the whole piece is mostly done in triplets. All right, so there are 3 in each beat. You have 3 notes. Now, what did I just do there? Something really different, isn't it? I have not taught this yet. See that TR above that note? That's called a trill. And all it means is you take the note and the one above it and mush them around. Okay, it takes a lot of practice to do them well. I never thought I could do them properly ever, all right? So, but anyway, it's not too hard once you get to do it. It's called an ornament. You don't have to do it, all right? You can just play it. But it makes it really sound nice if you could do the trill. It just makes it a little fancy. More common in the Baroque era, but still popular in the classical era. Okay, now the next little part coming down here, okay, we'll continue on. This is the only little difficulty in here is the right hand. Now all of a sudden it gets out of the triplets, all right? It's got a dotted 8th plus a 16th. So you do your left hand triplet, and then just fit that A in there, okay? It's a little bit tricky to do. So wait till that left hand A comes in there, and then you can do that, all right? All right, this gets a little bit tricky here too sometimes, all right? I put some fingering in here. It's just because the right hand decides it wants to be in thirds. Nothing big deal. Okay, you can just use whatever fingering, but I like to play the fingering that I've written there. Okay, and here, instead of triplets, guess what? You got sixes, all right? These are actually major sixes. And it's just, again, stretch your fingers. So this first section ends like this. And that's section A. Now, section B in this sonatina is very short, okay? It's just a slight difference. So it's almost like he's making a variation on it, all right? But it just goes like this. That's all it is, okay? And it is not much. You know, it's very, very short, okay? It's no different technically, okay? There's no trills, nothing fancy like that. It's just simple triplets. And here's those thirds again. And that was probably the hardest part of this movement, actually, is getting your hands around these, playing those notes together. It's very easy to do the first part of this because it's single notes, but once you get into the thirds, all right, but that's all that little B section is. It's just slightly different, and it just means we're going next on to the A section again. So to finish off this movement, we're right back where we started from. Okay, section A here. Remember I said it goes A, B, A? Well, we're back to A. All right. All right, and it's not necessarily a complete repetition. At first we went. Here, Clementi decides to mess things up a little bit. It's still the same melody, but he puts a nice little E flat here in. Just a little bit of a change. Alright, just a little bit of a melodic change to make it interesting, although it is the same melody. It's still. Alright, but that nice little E flat, what it's actually doing is going from an F7 into a B flat. Alright, making just a nice little change. So it's just the same thing, nice and soft. And then this lovely E flat. Okay, and you can do that. You can slow it right down at the end if you really want, and do that trill. Okay, it's just a nice movement. Just keep it smooth, quiet, and relaxed. Okay, and it's just a beautiful little movement. It's just in between there because the next movement, which I'm going to teach you in the next lesson, is extremely fast, all right? So you want to make sure this one is nice and slow. So that's the end of this lesson, the second movement of Clementi Sonatina in C. Thank you.